Hey, I'm Michael, and this is Michael in the Middle. It's an intergenerational relational podcast for people who are interested in better human interaction. I'm glad you're here. I'm really excited about this week, and our special guest has been special to me all my life. And it's my father, Walker Talmadge Johnson Jr., and we're gonna talk about his life as a minister to a certain extent, but we're also going to talk about his life over the course of his life. And I think even for some of you who have known him for a time, I'm guessing there are going to be some things that you're going to learn that are going to be really interesting. Not only is he my father, he's 23 years older than I am. And that's part of what we're doing with Michael in the Middle. We're talking about an intergenerational relational conversation. And I'm excited to welcome in my dad, Talmadge Johnson. It's good to see you, Daddy.
Thank you, Michael. Good to be here.
So you have been on this earth for how many years?
According to the records, February the 26th was my 85th birthday.
85.
I tell people that I'm older than I've ever been, but not as old as I want to be. I'm working on that.
That's great. That's great. Well, for those of our listeners and those who are viewing today and seeing some familiar faces, they're aware of your distinguished career as a minister in the Church of the Nazarene, and I do want to talk a little bit about that, and we'll get to that as you mentioned chronologically. Where were you born?
Actually, you mentioned about being a Nazarene minister. I've often said that before I was a Christian, I was a Nazarene. And that was due to the fact that I was born in the Samaritan Hospital in Nampa, Idaho, which is a building that still stands today on the campus of Northwest Nazarene University. And my birth took place there because well, that's where my mother was, and my daddy was not far away. Actually, it's kind of interesting that I was born in Idaho. For my roots, actually, when you think about my dad and my mother, they come from unique backgrounds. My dad was actually born just about 60 miles or so from here in Centerville, Tennessee, on a place called Swan Creek. When he was just a young boy, his family moved to East Texas, and then they migrated to Central Oklahoma, and that's where he was when my dad became a Christian and started out in school and college, finishing up high school at Bethany, which was then Bethany Peniel. But in his early freshman year, a minister friend took him to Idaho, a man who pastored Boise, Idaho, by the name of Ray Davis. As a result, my dad spent the next 10 years in Idaho in the Northwest. My mother didn't come from Centerville, Tennessee. She came from Sawyer, North Dakota, where she was born and grew up also in a minister's home. And her family migrated westward, actually to Nampa, in order for her sisters and her brother to have opportunity to attend Northwest Nazarene College. Well, Daddy and Mother met there, and as a result, I came into this world and have been blessed with such a rich heritage all of my life. Didn't get to stay in the Northwest very long. Dad had pastored a church in Kimberly, Idaho, but he'd also traveled quite a bit across the the Northwest there, and he got a call to go to Longview, Texas. And so that was my first opportunity to be in Texas, and that didn't last long. Daddy then took a church in Tishomingo, Oklahoma. So in those days, pastors were sometimes short-term.
Yeah.
And he was there for a year, and then he got a call to go to Vivian, Louisiana, and was there for 3 years. So in many respects, I had a lot on my resume already as far as locations. Starting out in Idaho, going to Texas, going to Oklahoma, and then Louisiana.
And then Alabama?
Well, I get to Alabama a little bit after that, but my dad, if you thought the 1 year tenure was short, he loved the mountains. And he said, I want to go to the mountains. So he got a call to go to a church in western Colorado. And it's one of those stories where he said, Helen, my mother's name, Helen, you pack while I pray. And so sure enough, we moved off. I was 5 years old. But it was one of those situations that my dad, although he was a superintendent later for 29 years, when he was trying to get pastors to stay at a place, he didn't tell them about his short term there. It only lasted a few weeks, and he felt the burden lifted. And we ended up going to South Dakota, where my grandfather, my mother's daddy, was district superintendent at the time. And as a result, he ended up getting a call to go to Alabama. So I do have in my history 3 years in the state of Alabama. Sylacauga, Alabama, 1 year, where I started the grade school, and also in a Children's Day meeting in which my father spoke. I remember going forward with some other kids to the altar and giving my heart to Jesus. We were there for a year, and then we went to Florence, Alabama for 2 years. And it was from there we ended up back in Oklahoma. Well, there's a whole lot more about Oklahoma, but up to that point, been moving around quite a bit.
So how old were you when you moved to Duncan? I know that's
I
where
was 8 years old.
8 years old.
8 years old when we moved to Duncan, and Daddy was the pastor there. And Duncan was the headquarters of Halliburton Oil Wells Cementing Company, a town of about 20,000 people. And so really Duncan became home to me for a greater part.
Because you were 8 when you moved there, and you went all the way through high school in Duncan.
I went all the way through high school with a little interlude.
Okay.
Daddy had pastored the church. There was only one church at the time there in Duncan. It was a downtown church right next to the courthouse square, and he had an amazing ministry. It was kind of extraordinary, and I know this is a little sidebar, but in 2 years' time, he took in 70 people into the membership of the church. Well, lo and behold, Oklahoma in those days was a western Oklahoma and an eastern Oklahoma district. And he went to the district assembly in Ponca City, Oklahoma in 1947. And lo and behold, he was elected superintendent on the third ballot. That was 104 churches. And he wasn't thinking about being a district superintendent, but he felt like he ought to do it, so he did that. And so for almost 2 years, I lived in Bethany. Our family moved to Bethany.
And is that where you went to school with Dr. James Dobson?
I went to school there with Dr. James Dobson, and
of course, he was Jimmy back then, right?
Jimmy Lee Dobson, yes, and he was an incredible. Our families were very close. My parents and Jim's parents were longtime friends. And of course, his father was an evangelist, chalk artist, and was teaching art at the time at Bethany. So those were 2 good years. But then the district divided, and it was northwest and southwest. And so my dad moved back. I mean, became superintendent of Southwest. So we moved back to Duncan, and it was there that I was until I went off to college. Graduated from Duncan High School.
So, I mean, I'm sure there are memories that you could share about all these different places that you lived as you were growing up. But landing in Duncan like you did and kind of settling in to Oklahoma as an 8-year-old and going all the way through your school years, primarily there in Oklahoma. Tell me a couple of things that you remember about Oklahoma that not necessarily having to do with the church, but what was it like to grow up in Duncan, Oklahoma? What was it like to spend time in that southwestern part of that state? Do you have any special memories?
Of course, it comes in increments. When I was 10 years old, my father was elected superintendent, so we moved back there. I think I was in like the 7th, 8th grade. So I was around 12, 13 years old. And so my father was traveling southwest Oklahoma.
Right.
In fact, before it was legal for me to be driving, probably about age 15, I was learning how to drive on those 2-lane pie crust edges highways in South Oklahoma. Duncan, Lawton, Altus, Snyder, out that direction, and then went north. The dividing line for the district was really Highway 66, going out from Oklahoma City, out to Erie, Sayre, Oklahoma. So I grew up in that part of the world, and I loved Oklahoma. Actually, it's where I fell in love with Oklahoma University football. And
who's the first? I mean, I guess you were growing up during that period where Bud Wilkinson was the coach, maybe?
Definitely, yes. And of course, there was a book from somewhere, and I cut out all the pictures of all the players, and I had it on one of those white poster boards, and had it attached to that door in the closet off of my dad's office there.
What were some of the names of the players? Do you remember any?
Well, there were a lot of great players in those days. The one that probably stands out the most because of personal attachment and the fact that he himself was a Nazarene was Merrill Green.
Merrill Green.
And Merrill Green is alive yet today in Bryan, Texas. And your brother is district superintendent down there in South Texas and sees Merrill from time to time.
He would be in his 90s.
He's probably 95 plus.
Wow.
An incredible man, and for so many decades, he held the record of the longest punt return of anybody, at least in the Big 8 or the Big 12, 85 yards.
That's great.
And,
and you didn't have access to TV to watch games back then.
No, I didn't have.
I mean, they didn't really broadcast that many TV games.
No,
back then.
but I remember going with the high school friends to a friend that had a TV, and we'd sit around on Saturdays and watch OU football.
So you were able to watch, not just listen on the radio.
Yeah, but most of it I listened to on radio, and I imagined and you know, Bud Wilkinson was an icon in Oklahoma and ran for Senate, governor, whatever, and he was he was a great man, and so I treasure those memories of.
Well, I mean, just for you folks that are listening out there or watching, that love of Oklahoma football in particular was passed on from generation to generation, and we've had some great family trips where we've been able to get out and see some games together in those years since. How did you land on being a New York Yankees fan? I'm a little disappointed I didn't.
Yeah,
tell you
I'm sorry I don't have my Yankee cap on today. However, right now, I hope it changes tonight. But right now, the Yankees are falling on hard times, and Aaron Judge has only hit 46 home runs. He needs to hit some more home runs to break the record. But I would say probably the presence of Mickey Mantle in Oklahoma, from Northeast Oklahoma, of course, pitcher I think it was, and other factors entered into my really fascination with the Yankees. I think a player by the name of Bobby Mercer and
Bobby Mercer was from Midwest City.
Okay.
I think I remember you telling me, didn't Bobby Richardson play for the Yankees too?
Yes, he did. Yes, he did.
And he was a guy that I remember you talking about someone.
Yeah, well, of course, Joe DiMaggio, was a Yankee, and
he had a 57 game hitting streak. I think Oklahoma won 47 games in a row.
Okay.
Well, you fact checkers out there, you can take care of that. But I want to ask you about something else back then, just during that time. What when you weren't going to church, what'd you do for fun?
That's tough. And God and everybody's listening to this. What else was there to do but to go to church? And but my dad. There were a lot of do's and don'ts in those years growing up. But my dad was so thoughtful of me in going on a fishing trip or taking me over to a place called Craterville Park in the Mount Scott area. Now, when you say a mountain, you're not talking about a mountain. You're talking about a hill compared to a lot of places. But they had an amusement park over there, and bumper cars, and my dad would get one or two of my friends and take us over there. We went to a lake down in Texas, and then, of course, having lived in Tishomingo in his earliest pastorate years, he had a Chevrolet dealer friend there, Reed Hutchins, and traded cars there 2 or 3 times. And I remember we went down there to Tishomingo, Oklahoma, and Pennington Creek ran right through downtown in Tishomingo, Oklahoma. And Daddy had really splurged, and we had a 5 horsepower Sea-King motor that you
little boat
kept in the garage, and then you take it and rent a boat.
Oh, okay.
And so that's when the sand bass were running. We had a lot of fun doing that.
That's great.
My dad loved me and cared for me, and sometimes when there were some things happening that I wasn't going to be involved in for whatever reason, he always found a way to make up a difference, and said, "Let's go." He knew how to say, "Talmadge, let's go."
Your mother, Meemaw Helen, helped your dad with the work of the district, but you also have a younger sister, Karen, who I guess has she turned 80 yet?
She did, yes.
In
she
January.
She's just 5 years younger than I.
Yeah.
And Karen was actually born while we were in Vivian, Louisiana, in Shreveport. And when you look back and you think about all those moments in your life that were life changing, it's extraordinary. You talked about my mother helping my dad with the district. Actually, my dad was a pastor of a number of churches. He was a district superintendent for 29 years. He never had a paid staff member, but he did have my mother, and she never let him forget it.
Yeah.
And she was the one that could read his writing, and she did all the typing. She did she did so much of the work that an assistant would do in an office, and so in many respects, those were formative years, and I celebrate the teamwork that my daddy and mother demonstrated, and my sister, of course, she also graduated from high school in Duncan. In fact, I don't want to fast forward too much, but she was working in the hospital in Duncan, Oklahoma, in Lindley Hospital, where you were born in 1960.
Yeah.
And so we have so many treasured memories. And,
Same hospital that Ron Howard.
That's right,
Opie
Ron
Taylor,
Howard,
Richie
Opie.
Cunningham. Yeah.
Yeah. Now speaking of Duncan, I lived first at 1213 Hickory, across from Emerson School, grade school, and then I lived at 906 Cedar. Now my earliest gainful employment was starting a business of grass mowing. And so I started with the old reel type. I have a picture that was taken of me by a newspaper reporter who was driving around town looking for human interest stories. And he saw me on the sidewalk. And I had arranged what you might call the first stage of a riding mower. I had a wagon that I tied to the mower, and had a camping stool that I sat on, and on the sidewalk, I'd get the engine revved up, and I'd go driving down the sidewalk.
My word.
And so I don't know where that article is today, but that was a special memory, and yeah.
That's great.
Those were the days you cut grass a yard for $5,
Wow.
and
Wow.
so it was exciting.
So, you being 5 years older than Aunt Karen, you went on off to college as I guess an 18-year-old, went from Duncan back up to Bethany to go to college. I think I remember this. It was Bethany Peniel College. While you were there, it changed to Bethany Nazarene College. And then, about 30 or 40 years ago, they changed to Southern Nazarene University.
That is correct. It was BPC, BNC, and now SNU.
That's great.
And Janelle and I were students, and I'd like to talk about Janelle if you want me to. But
well, I definitely want to know how you met my mother. That's important to me. I don't even know that I've ever really heard you say the first time you saw the woman who ultimately you would marry and become my mother.
She was doing something that she didn't enjoy. She was working in the kitchen, in the dining hall, back in the days when we served family style at college. And my college roommate, Ron Buddy Emmert, who lives today in Orange, Texas, was working back there. And he said, I want you to meet this girl back here. So he introduced me to Janelle. And it was not immediate romance. There was a little interlude of about 12 to 18 months there until I saw the light. But that freshman year was unique. She had quite a few. She had quite a few
suitors. Gentlemen callers.
Yeah, in fact, I used to say that getting Janelle was like going to Baskin Robbins. I had to take a number, and she was much sought after. And I actually dated a young lady that was a very fine young lady, and she was from Kansas City.
Okay.
And we dated quite a bit that first freshman year.
Yeah.
In fact, a little interesting note. At the freshman banquet, where I just happened to be serving as freshman class president, I
just happened.
Yeah. I took the young lady named Olitha, later known as Lee. Gary Hartpence, who later became Gary Hart, took Janelle at the freshman banquet. And the governor of the state of Oklahoma, Raymond Gary, was the speaker. So that was a kind of an interesting turn of events for times changed.
Well, yeah, you gotta finish that story off a little bit because Gary Hartpence, who later changed his name to Hart, if you're a student of political history at all, that's Senator Gary Hart from Colorado. There's a lot more to that story, but if I remember correctly, Gary and Lee ended up getting married, and you and Janelle Crawford end up getting married, and you know, I mean, it's no secret which way you guys probably leaned politically across the years. But I happen to know, and I think it's really a wonderful story, and it fits right along with some of the things that I'm trying to talk about with this podcast. Even though you and Gary had wildly different views, perhaps on certain things, you maintained, and to this day,
we had a
relationship.
very good friendship. We played tennis together. He traveled with me. He went to my home. Gary was a very gifted guy. Gary is a gifted man, and we've been very successful in his own right. He and I share, in one respect, a common grief. About 2 years ago, his wife, Lee, passed away, and perhaps the greatest loss in my life humanly is your mother, who passed away this past November. Yeah, Gary, in fact, went off to Yale and became involved in politics and did very well. And had some unfortunate things happen that maybe kept him from going further than he would have, for he really was on a fast track. There's a little interesting note, and I believe it's I'm not sure exactly the date. National Enquirer.
I remember this.
Where Gary and I had been in a political race in college for student body president, and it just so happened that I won that particular election. And when they found out about it, I was interviewed by National Enquirer, and lo and behold, it came out in the National Enquirer headline. His picture on one side, my picture on the other, and it said, "The man who beat Hart for president." So, when his wife passed away, I made contact with him and expressed my sympathies. A lot of good memories. College years were great. I mentioned Ron Emmert, Buddy Emmert, and his wife, Kathy. And Janelle and I were very close. We were in each other's weddings, and so I just have a lot of rich experiences.
Your life, I mean, just the lifespan itself, the 85 years on this earth. There are probably thousands of stories that you could tell. I'll kind of cut through it just for a moment. You started out as an itinerant evangelist out of college. You and Mother got married in March of 1959. I was born in February of 1960. I kind of tell the story that I came 2 weeks early. He was up preaching a revival in Missouri, and my Aunt Karen actually was there with my mom and held me before my dad did. And we've kind of told that story. I joked about the fact that coming 2 weeks early as a baby was one of the few times in my life I was early for anything. Yeah. Try to squeeze every second out of every minute, still to this day. And then you went to pastor a church in Elk City, Oklahoma, which is out on historic Route 66 in western Oklahoma. Moved to Oklahoma City in 1975 to be the founding pastor of the Western Oaks Church. And there were some great times in all of that. I mean, the stories that we could tell about your ministry in Oklahoma, but there's a couple of things that I think would be interesting to people, in addition to being a very strong preacher and a great pastor to people. My dad was also quite an athlete, particularly in fast-pitch softball. And the tradition was that the teenagers at the summer youth camp would try to beat the counselors. It was campers versus counselors, and my dad baffled those young men who could mash a baseball, but couldn't figure out what to do with that underhanded fast pitch. That was a lot of fun, wasn't it?
That was a whole lot of fun, and I don't know. It just kind of in those days just kind of came naturally, and like you say, the guys were used to playing baseball, and so softball was a fun thing. I had traveled as an evangelist for 3 years, but at the 18-month point, we felt like we needed to go into the pastorate.
Find a home.
And so got the call to Elk City, Oklahoma. And your brother Jeffrey was born in Elk City, just a few yards from Route 66.
Yep.
In a crowded hospital. And speaking of Oklahoma football, the doctor was an avid OU football fan, Dr. Husband. He told Janelle, he said, it was October, said, you need to have this baby because I'm going to go to the OU Texas game, and you need to get this taken care of. Well, sure enough, he came just right on schedule on the 10th day of October, and Dr. Husband was able to go ahead and go to the game without any problem. But yeah, those were great years. Actually, it was 1965 then when we went to Oklahoma City and started Western Oaks Church.
Yeah, I may have misspoken. We were there from 65 to 75.
That's right. Yeah,
in Oklahoma City.
Those were great years.
I mean, there are so many stories just in the first 15 years of my life that I remember looking back on, and they extend back into, just so many deep relationships. But I think one of the things that I remember most about growing up was watching my parents and his parents. My mom's parents lived primarily in Washington State at that time. But I was able to watch the magic of relationship building unfold in the context of ministry. And that has stayed with me to this day. So in 1975, you were presented with an opportunity and in a sense, really a compelling call to shift your ministry from pastoring one local church to being responsible for all of the churches of the Nazarene in the state of Mississippi. And although there were not a lot of large churches in Mississippi, there were some wonderful churches and wonderful people that we met down there. And I'll just tell the listeners that my dad was talking about driving his dad as a teenager before he really had his driver's license. In Oklahoma, you had to wait till you were 16 to get your driver's license. But one of the softening edges of the move to Mississippi was that you only had to be 15 in Mississippi to get a driver's license. So I kind of got a head start on some of my buddies back in Oklahoma on getting driver's license. And my mom and my brother would stay most Sundays and go to Jackson, Mississippi, First Church of the Nazarene. But here I was, 15 years old, and my dad and I started traveling the roads of Mississippi like he had done with his father in Oklahoma. And that was a great time. We'd get up and we'd head out, and I would drive and you would be over there looking over your notes about what you wanted to say to the people. How many churches did you have in Mississippi when we moved there to be responsible for?
Well, I think there were approximately 45 or 50 churches throughout the state. And it was a marvelous experience moving to Mississippi.
You have talked many times about one of the most impactful relationships in your life being the relationship that developed between you and Charles Johnson and mother with Shirley, the two couples of you sharing the same name but really different backgrounds. Talk a little bit about what it was like to meet Charles and Shirley.
I met nearly all of the people when we first moved there. And
When you're saying all of the people you met, you went around the
district,
district
yeah,
meeting the different pastors.
took about a five night tour of Mississippi and meeting kind of like a zone basis. And we would meet with the pastors first, and then go to the service, and then have a reception, and that way you got acquainted with the different groups and the different pastors. Mississippi was life-changing. It was life-changing for Janelle and me. It was life-changing for you and Jeffrey. But going to Mississippi, having lived in a culture like Nazarene culture in the Bethany, Oklahoma City area, for one thing, and totally dominated, not like Mississippi, which was 45% black Americans in Mississippi. So the first time I met Charles Johnson was in Hattiesburg, Mississippi, and we met at Shoney's restaurant. The different pastors were there from on that district, from on that zone, and I felt kind of a cold reception. For one thing, Charles Johnson didn't know me, and I really didn't know him, and it was not necessarily a warm and cozy time. We went into the service, and the service got along very well. We had good music, and about halfway through the message, I do not know to this day what I was preaching about, but something happened to Charles Johnson, and he came alive. And when he came alive, his people came alive. And I've joked about it that from then on I preached things I never even thought of, because it just, we went to the reception and had a little punch and cookies back there. And Charles Johnson came to me. He's 1 year younger than I. He came to me and he said, we both have the same name. I believe we check our family tree. We might be cousins. And I put my arm around him and I said, not cousins, brothers. From that day until the day he passed, I was 38, he was 37. We were brothers. And it revolutionized the relationship of Meridian, Mississippi, and the Nazarenes in Mississippi, and Charles became a leader on the district.
I've thought about this a lot over the course of my life, and I even talked a little bit about the move to Mississippi in my first episode, where I was telling a little bit of my story. But I don't ever remember you saying, I got to do something about this situation. I got to do something to create a different environment. Again, it was just out of the context of a relationship with another human being, and I think that's what resonated most with Charles and Shirley. It wasn't that you were trying to do something just to curry favor or to win them over. It was a genuine heart of love. And if there's anything I could say to people in this climate even today, the way we get along with each other is not to see each other for what is external, but to realize that we're all created in the image of God. Charles used to sing, "He made me in his image. He made me just like him." I remember that so well, and I loved watching you guys interact across the years.
I loved going to Meridian to be there and participate and preach. Charles and Shirley, marvelous people. She referred to Janelle as her sister, and I referred to him as my brother. And love finds a way. And it worked in that case.
Time doesn't permit, but that relationship actually helped you when you moved to Mississippi moved from Mississippi to Tennessee 5 years later, particularly in Memphis with Monroe and Joanne Ballard.
That's right, yeah.
And helped them establish the Neighborhood Christian Center, which is today one of Memphis's most outstanding community organizations.
It's extraordinary.
Yeah.
Rufus Sanders was the pastor, and Monroe and Joanne were the lay leaders, and Neighborhood Christian Center was formed during that time. And
was the church called Friendship back then?
It was Friendship. That's correct.
To this day, and now Monroe Ballard Jr. is leading that church
That's right.
as a lay pastor, and may end up just becoming the permanent pastor. There are so many different relationships that I have observed you having across the years. The phone calls that I still witness to this day from people who were special to you all the way back to your teen years and throughout college and things like that. What does it take to keep relationships alive across the course of time?
Well, we have a friend, and she's well known in this community, who used to say to Jeffrey, "Be for real." And I think being for real and authentic and not sham and not put on and not, well, I got to do this to make this happen. Just be who you are and love people for who they are. And God helped us in that regard.
Without getting too real, how do you get through a day when you miss the person who meant the most to you? How do you deal with being in an apartment and knowing that the love of your life, in an earthly sense, can't be there with you? What do you do to work your way through that, Daddy?
Well, recently I think I find myself just kind of praying accidentally or intentionally, Lord help me. And I have Janelle's little picture there in my palatial apartment. All of my earthly possessions are in two little rooms there in the Rutland place, and I treasure the presence there, and I guess the fact that I know how authentic Janelle was. Janelle and I, if she had lived to March the 6th, we would have been married 63 years. And I treasure her life. She was so genuine. She was so real. She was so talented. She was so Texas. She was a proud Texan, and I was so blessed to have her. She was such a wonderful mother to Jeffrey and you, and a wonderful companion to me, and she served God and served the church, and she spoiled me. Quite honestly, she was an incredible cook, and I'm having to work on being happy with what I don't have now. Yeah, so those are special memories, and
I got to move on because I'm already struggling a little bit, but you're 85. You're older than you've ever been and not as old as you want to be. What does that mean to you? What are you looking forward to right now? And what could you say to people who are younger than you to help them get ready for this kind of moment when the days that are ahead are fewer than those that are behind?
Well, exactly, and it's a question that would seem like easy to answer. On the other hand, it's a challenging question because I think a lot of times when people say, "Talmadge, how are you doing?" I say, "I'm doing well, day at a time, And I try not to project too much out there in the future. I have tried my best. With Janelle's passing, it has just so happened that the place we had so quickly, and so that resolved any issues. And there'll not be a lot for the family to say, well, who's going to get this and who's going to get that, because there's not a lot left. It's gone. But I would say the important thing is try to make every day a day that you cast your care on the Lord. I think probably now I'm more interested in each member of the family. And I've kind of tried to make a practice more recently of every night before I close my eyes and try to go to sleep is I will either audibly or silently take the name of every member of my family to God in prayer. And God, you know about them. You know their need. And in each case, I'm praying that God will guide their lives and help them to be all that God wants them to be. For in the final analysis, it's not your position in life, and I've had a number of positions. That's not the big deal. The big deal is who are you in your relationship to God and your relationship to others. And I've tried my best. My dad did a good job modeling for me relationships with other people, and I treasure that memory, and I guess that's the best way, Michael, that I can say I'm taking it a day at a time, and I am trying to stay healthy. I'm doing everything I know to do. My mother passed, and one day she had a fistful of pills she was going to take. A lot of them were nutrients and a lot of them were pills. And she said, I just don't know why God doesn't take me. And I said, well, Mother, if you'd quit taking all those pills, he might do it. and I discovered that was not a smart thing for me to say, because I've been doing the same thing.
Yeah.
And
So from 1994 to 2001, you led the Global Church's efforts with Sunday school ministries, and then you became general superintendent in 2001, served for 4 years there. Had a chance to, in some respects, travel the world back then. What I'm interested in, I know I think you told me 59 countries, on your passport across the course of your life. I'm sure there are church leaders that have visited more countries than that, but what I'd be interested in perhaps is, was there a common thread between people that you saw in our country here, in different parts of, the U.S., but was there something sort of universal about humanity that you saw in your world travels? And we've talked a lot about relationship. What could you tell folks here, kind of what you saw literally occurring around the world?
Jesus was a relationship builder. He worked with people of all backgrounds. They even said, why, he's eating with sinners. He had a passion to reach people. And I think the important thing is we start where people are. And it's not our desire to Americanize the mission field, but to be a part of a movement that is Christian, that is holy, and that is right. It was an awesome thing to be in Cape Town, South Africa,
okay, where
friends that I had pastored had just been in the community. Raymond Emmert is an inventor. He's a designer, and he had created the capacity to transport in compartments a chapel. And in 1 week's time, he brought a crew with him, and they erected a chapel that caught the attention of the people of Cape Town, South Africa. There were pictures in the big newspaper. And on that Sunday, I had the privilege of dedicating and a message, that chapel. It was an awesome experience to think about the impact that had on that community in just 1 week's time. Well, it's happened in a number of communities around the world that Raymond had done that. That's just one incident.
Didn't you preach in China one time?
I did. In fact, when I was in Beijing, we went down to Shijiazhuang, China, and of course we had two observers traveling with us with the government.
From the government, yeah.
And on Sunday we went to the Three Self Church, and I'm told that it was the first time that a national leader was able to address the crowd. There were 2,000 people there, and Jim Williams was the translator for me, and I spoke to the people, gave them greetings. That was an awesome experience. Indeed, it was actually a Presbyterian lady that gave the message, and she spoke from "Cast all your cares on Him, for He cares for you." The songs that they sang were "What a friend we have in Jesus," and "God hath not promised." It was an awesome day, indeed. And
that's an awesome story, and probably a great way to sort of wrap this up. You know, we're all a product of the environment in which we're raised, and I think you can tell by the conversation here with my dad what an impact my folks have had on my life, and I'm just one of thousands. I did learn the importance of building and maintaining relationships with people regardless. There's a lot of ebbs and flows in life. People change, they change their views on things. There are things that are interrupters sometimes for relationships, but the intentionality of staying in touch with people and staying in relationship with people has allowed us to see people in a more positive light, in hopes of things potentially evening out or working themselves out. And even if they don't, it's still the right thing to try to maintain a good relationship with someone. Don't blow a relationship up over disagreements that end up in harsh words. Find a way to stay with it and keep working at it, and stay in the middle of relationships with people, because someday you're going to look back on the course of your life and be glad you did. Thanks for being with us. We'll see you next time.